Okay, I have to tell you what God revealed to me last night about why His chosen ones face the hardest battles, and what He showed me will completely change how you see your struggles. I've been wrestling with this question for years, watching faithful people endure trial after trial while others seem to coast through life untouched. But last night, in the most profound encounter I've ever experienced, Jesus gave me an answer that left me absolutely speechless and transformed my understanding of divine purpose forever. To understand what happened, we have to go back to where this question first took root in my heart. This is going to be a long story, so I ask that you bear with me as I take you through this journey that led to the most life-changing revelation I've ever received. It started years ago when I first began portraying Jesus in The Chosen, and I started noticing a pattern that deeply troubled my soul and challenged everything I thought I knew about God's love. I remember sitting in my trailer during the first season, reading fan mail from viewers who were pouring out their hearts to me. Letter after letter from people who loved God deeply, who served Him faithfully, who prayed constantly and trusted Him completely. Yet their stories were filled with heartbreak, financial struggles, health crises, family betrayals, and disappointments that seemed to multiply rather than diminish as their faith grew stronger and more authentic. There was Sarah, a single mother of 3 who taught Sunday school for 15 years while battling chronic illness and working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. There was Michael, a pastor who lost his home in a fire just weeks after his church voted him out over doctrinal differences he couldn't compromise on. There was Maria, a missionary who spent 20 years serving in remote villages, only to return home to find her marriage in ruins and her children estranged from both her and God. These weren't people who were living in rebellion or walking away from their faith. These were the most devoted followers of Christ I'd ever encountered, people whose love for God was evident in every word they wrote to me. They weren't complaining or demanding answers from God. They were simply sharing their hearts with someone they felt might understand their struggle, to reconcile their pain with their faith in a loving Father who supposedly cared. For them, the more letters I read, the more this pattern became impossible to ignore. It seemed like the people who loved God the most, who sacrificed the most for His kingdom, who stayed faithful through the darkest seasons, were the ones facing the greatest trials. Meanwhile, I watched people who seemed indifferent to spiritual things, living comfortable, relatively problem-free lives. I watched selfish, manipulative people prosper while generous, kind-hearted believers struggled to pay their bills. This contradiction began eating at my soul in ways I couldn't express to anyone around me. How could I portray a loving, caring Jesus to millions of viewers when I was secretly wrestling with whether God actually protected and provided for His most faithful children? How could I speak about His goodness when the evidence in my mailbox suggested that following Him closely might actually make your life harder, not easier? I started researching this phenomenon, thinking maybe I was missing something obvious. I studied the lives of biblical heroes and found the same pattern everywhere. Abraham was asked to leave everything familiar and wander in uncertainty for decades. Joseph was sold into slavery by his own brothers and spent years in prison for maintaining his integrity. Moses gave up palace luxury to lead a complaining, rebellious people through 40 years of wilderness wandering. David spent years running for his life from King Saul, despite being God's anointed choice for the throne. The prophets were rejected, persecuted, and often lived in poverty while delivering God's messages to people who didn't want to hear them. Even John the Baptist, whom Jesus called the greatest man born of woman, was imprisoned and executed for his faithfulness to God's calling on his life. Then there were the apostles, men who walked with Jesus personally and gave their lives to spreading His message. Most of them faced persecution, imprisonment, and martyrdom. Paul, arguably the most effective missionary in church history, described his life as filled with shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonments, and constant danger. These were God's chosen ones, His most beloved servants, and their lives were marked by extraordinary hardship. The more I studied, the more confused I became. If God loves His children and has the power to make their lives easier, why does He seem to allow His most faithful followers to endure the greatest suffering? Why don't the people who love Him most get to experience more of His protection, provision, and peace? Why does faithfulness seem to be rewarded with difficulty rather than comfort? This question haunted me through seasons 2 and 3 of The Chosen. I found myself struggling to portray Jesus with authentic joy and peace when I was secretly wondering if following him was actually a guarantee of a harder life. I was afraid to voice these doubts to anyone because I didn't want to discourage other believers or damage the ministry God had given me through the show. By the time we started filming season 4, this internal conflict was affecting my performance and my personal relationship with God. I was going through the motions of prayer and worship, but my heart was guarded, afraid to fully surrender to someone who might respond to my devotion with increased trials. I loved Jesus, but I was becoming afraid of what loving him too much might cost me. If you're watching this right now and feeling this same struggle, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I want to know I'm not alone in this journey. But let me get back to what I was sharing with you. Then came my own season of testing that brought this question to a crisis point in my life. Just as season 5 was being released to audiences around the world, everything that could go wrong in my personal life seemed to go wrong at once. Financial pressures I hadn't anticipated, relationship struggles that blindsided me, health concerns that came out of nowhere, and professional challenges that threatened everything I'd worked so hard to build. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, playing the role of Jesus Christ, bringing hope and healing to millions of people through The Chosen, and my own life was falling apart behind the scenes. The success of the show was reaching new heights, while my personal world felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet. I couldn't understand why God would allow this to happen when I was dedicating my career to serving him. I remember one particularly difficult night when the weight of everything became almost unbearable. I was preparing for scenes we'd be filming for season 6, trying to get into character to portray the Prince of Peace, while my own heart was tormented with questions and fears. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me, exhausted and confused about God's goodness. That's when I finally decided I had to get an answer to this question that had been destroying my peace for years. I couldn't continue living in this tension between what I believed about God's love and what I was experiencing in real life. I couldn't keep portraying Jesus as loving and trustworthy while secretly wondering if trusting him fully would only lead to more pain and disappointment. So I made a decision that night to lay everything on the altar before God. I told him I needed to understand why his chosen ones seemed to struggle more than everyone else, or I wouldn't be able to continue in ministry with integrity. I needed him to either change my circumstances or change my understanding, because I couldn't live in this confused, conflicted state any longer. I spent hours in prayer that night, pouring out my heart to God with more honesty and vulnerability than I'd ever allowed myself before. I told him about every doubt, every fear, every question that had been plaguing my mind. I asked him to show me the truth about why following him closely seemed to guarantee a harder path, and I promised I was ready to handle whatever answer he gave me, even if it wasn't what I wanted to hear. What happened next was unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my entire life. As I was praying, I felt this overwhelming sense of peace wash over me, and suddenly I wasn't in my room anymore. I found myself in a place that felt both completely foreign and perfectly familiar at the same time. It was like being in the most beautiful garden you can imagine, but also like being held in the safest embrace you've ever felt. The light in this place wasn't harsh or blinding, but it was so pure and warm that it seemed to penetrate every cell of my being with love and comfort. I could hear what sounded like gentle water flowing somewhere nearby, and there was a fragrance in the air that reminded me of every flower that had ever brought me joy, but infinitely more beautiful and complex than anything earthly. Then I saw him. Jesus was walking toward me with a smile that conveyed such deep understanding and compassion that I immediately felt every wall I'd built around my heart begin to crumble. He didn't look disappointed in me for my doubts or frustrated with my questions. Instead, his eyes held a mixture of love and excitement, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The first words he spoke to me were, "Jonathan, you've been asking the right question, but you've been looking for the wrong kind of answer." He gestured for me to walk with him through this incredible place, and as we began moving together, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in years, settling into my soul. I knew I was about to receive the understanding I'd been desperately seeking. He continued, You've been assuming that struggle is evidence of my absence or displeasure, when actually it's often evidence of my trust and my presence. You've been measuring my love by your comfort level, when I measure my love by your growth level. The question isn't why my chosen ones struggle more. The question is why I choose strugglers to be my chosen ones. I felt confused by this distinction, so I asked him to help me understand what he meant. He stopped walking and turned to face me directly. His eyes filled with such tenderness that I almost started crying right there. "Jonathan," he said, "I don't choose people because they're strong enough to handle anything. I choose people who are willing to let me be strong through their weakness." He began explaining something that completely shifted my perspective on everything I'd been wrestling with. When you look at someone's struggles and assume I must not love them very much, you're seeing the situation backwards. Struggle isn't punishment, it's preparation. It's not evidence that I've abandoned someone. It's evidence that I'm preparing them for something greater than they can currently imagine. Jesus gestured around the beautiful place where we were walking, and I noticed that even in this perfect environment, there were areas that looked like they had been through some kind of transformation process. Not destruction, but refinement. Even heaven itself went through a process to become what it is now, he said. Nothing precious is created without pressure. Nothing valuable is formed without fire. Nothing beautiful emerges without some form of breaking first. I asked him why he couldn't just make things easier for people who are trying so hard to serve him faithfully. His response completely changed how I understood his love. Easy doesn't create character. Comfort doesn't produce compassion. Smooth paths don't develop the kind of faith that can move mountains. I could make everyone's life easy, but then I'd be robbing them of the opportunity to become who they're truly meant to be. He continued with an analogy that made everything click into place for me. Think about the actors you admire most. Are they the ones who only play easy roles, or are they the ones who challenge themselves with difficult, complex characters that require them to dig deep and discover parts of themselves they didn't know existed? The roles that transform an actor aren't the comfortable ones. I choose certain people for difficult roles, not because I love them less, but because I love them enough to trust them with assignments that will reveal their true strength and my true power working through them. The people you've been pitying in those letters aren't my forgotten children. They're my trusted co-workers, partners in bringing heaven to earth through their faithful responses to trials. Jesus then said something that completely revolutionized my understanding of suffering. When you see someone going through a difficult season and remaining faithful, you're not witnessing my absence. You're witnessing a miracle in progress. You're seeing human weakness being transformed into divine strength. You're watching ordinary people become extraordinary testimonies of what's possible when someone refuses to let circumstances define their faith. I told him I still didn't understand why faithful people seem to face more trials than unfaithful people, and he smiled as if he'd been waiting for that exact question. "Jonathan, you're comparing their external circumstances, but you're not seeing their internal transformation. The person who never faces trials may look comfortable, but they're also spiritually stagnant. The person who faces trials and remains faithful is growing in ways that will impact eternity." He began walking again, and as we moved through this beautiful place, he continued his explanation. "I don't give people more than they can handle, but I do give my chosen ones exactly what they need to become who I created them to be. Some people need gentle correction, others need intensive refinement. Some people need comfort, others need challenge. I customize each person's journey based on their potential, not their preferences. The people you call my chosen ones aren't chosen because they're perfect, they're chosen because they're willing. They're not selected because they're strong, they're selected because they're surrendered. They don't get harder assignments because I trust them more, they get harder assignments because they trust me more. There's a difference that makes all the difference." I was beginning to understand, but I asked him about the people who seem to live easy lives without any real relationship with God. How is that fair? His answer surprised me. "Jonathan, you're assuming that an easy life is a blessed life, but what if an easy life is actually a limited life? What if comfort without purpose is actually a form of spiritual poverty? The person who never faces any resistance may never discover their true strength." The person who never encounters any obstacles may never develop perseverance. The person who never experiences any lack may never learn to depend on me. Easy circumstances can actually be a barrier to spiritual growth if they prevent someone from developing the character they'll need for their eternal destiny. Jesus stopped walking and placed his hand on my shoulder, looking into my eyes with such love and understanding. I'm not saying I enjoy watching my children struggle. Every tear they cry breaks my heart. Every pain they feel, I feel with them. But I love them too much to let them stay comfortable in situations that would keep them from becoming everything they're meant to be. The struggles you've been questioning aren't random hardships, they're strategic opportunities. They're not evidence of my displeasure, they're invitations to partnership. Every trial is an opportunity for someone to demonstrate my faithfulness to a watching world. Every difficulty is a chance for someone to experience my power in their weakness. He then said something that brought tears to my eyes. The people you've been concerned about in those letters aren't my forgotten children who are suffering despite their faith. They're my chosen ambassadors who are suffering for their faith, and their faithful responses are changing the spiritual atmosphere around them in ways they can't even see. When Sarah continues to serve in Sunday school while battling illness, she's not just teaching children about my love, she's demonstrating it. When Michael maintains his integrity despite losing his position, he's not just standing for truth, he's modeling it. When Maria forgives instead of becoming bitter, she's not just choosing healing for herself, she's creating an opportunity for healing in her family. Their struggles have purpose. Then Jesus began sharing with me what he called the 7 sacred truths about chosen suffering that would forever change how I understood the relationship between God's love and life's difficulties. He said these truths were hidden mysteries that most people never discover because they're too focused on avoiding pain to recognize its divine purpose in their spiritual development. The first sacred truth, he said, is that I use pressure to create precious stones. Diamonds are formed under intense pressure deep in the earth over thousands of years. The pressure isn't the enemy of the diamond, it's the creator of the diamond. The struggles you face aren't obstacles to your destiny, they're the very forces that are shaping you into who you're meant to become. When I allow pressure in someone's life, I'm not being cruel, I'm being creative. I'm not punishing them, I'm preparing them. The intensity of the pressure often corresponds to the value of what I'm creating through their life. The more precious the calling, the more intense the preparation required to fulfill it with excellence and authenticity. The second sacred truth is that I use resistance to create strength. Every muscle in your body grows stronger by working against resistance. If you never faced any resistance, your muscles would atrophy and become useless. The same principle applies to your spiritual muscles. Faith, hope, love, patience, perseverance, and wisdom all grow stronger when they're exercised against opposition. The people you admire most spiritually aren't those who never faced resistance. They're those who faced it and overcame it. They developed spiritual strength by pressing through difficulties, not by avoiding them. Their faith became unshakable because it was tested and proven authentic. Their love became unconditional because it was challenged and remained constant. The third sacred truth is that I use brokenness to create breakthrough. Every breakthrough you've ever experienced has come through some form of breaking. Breaking through barriers, breaking free from limitations, breaking open to new possibilities. What looks like destruction from one angle is actually construction from another angle. What feels like an ending is actually a beginning. When I allow something in your life to be broken, I'm not being destructive, I'm being reconstructive. I'm making room for something better than what was there before. The broken places in your life become the places where my light shines through most brightly. Your greatest wounds, when surrendered to me, become your greatest weapons for helping others. The fourth sacred truth is that I use desert seasons to create dependency. In the comfortable times, it's easy to become self-reliant and forget how much you need me. But in the wilderness seasons, you're reminded that every breath, every step, every hope depends on my provision and grace. Desert seasons aren't punishment, they're recalibration. The people who emerge from desert seasons with their faith intact are different people than when they entered. They've learned to find water in the Word, shade in my presence, and direction from my voice. They've discovered that I am enough when nothing else is available, This discovery transforms them from people who know about me to people who know me intimately. The fifth sacred truth is that I use isolation to create intimacy. Sometimes I allow people to feel alone, not because I've abandoned them, but because I want them to discover how close I actually am. In the crowd, it's easy to miss my voice. In the quiet, you learn to recognize my whisper. In the busy times, it's simple to rely on others. In the solitary times, you discover my companionship. The chosen ones often go through seasons where earthly relationships disappoint them or earthly securities fail them, because I want them to learn that I am the relationship that never fails and the security that never disappears. These seasons of isolation aren't rejection, they're invitation into deeper intimacy with me than they've ever experienced before. The sixth sacred truth is that I use waiting to create wisdom. Everything worthwhile requires timing, and timing can't be rushed without destroying the outcome. I could give people everything they want immediately, but that would rob them of the wisdom they gain through the waiting process. Waiting teaches patience, builds character, and develops spiritual maturity. During waiting seasons, people learn to trust my timing instead of their own timeline. They discover that my delays are not my denials. They develop the ability to hope when circumstances don't warrant hope. They learn to rest in my sovereignty instead of fighting against my schedule. These are invaluable spiritual skills that can only be learned through experience. The seventh sacred truth is that I use your testimony to create transformation in others. The struggles you overcome don't just benefit you, they become tools I use to help others overcome similar struggles. Your victory over fear helps others find courage. Your healing from heartbreak helps others find hope. Your breakthrough from limitation helps others break free. This is why I often choose to strengthen you through trials instead of removing the trials completely. The person who has never faced difficulty can encourage others with theories. The person who has faced difficulty and overcome it can encourage others with testimony. Theory informs the mind, but testimony transforms the heart. I need people with powerful testimonies. Jesus paused in his teaching and looked at me with such compassion. Jonathan, do you understand now why I trust my chosen ones with harder assignments? It's not because I love them less. It's because I love them so much that I'm willing to develop them into people who can represent me accurately in a broken world that desperately needs authentic hope. The comfortable Christian can tell people that I love them, but the tested Christian can show people that I love them. The untested believer can quote verses about my faithfulness, but the proven believer can demonstrate my faithfulness through their own experience. Both have value, but one has authority that the other lacks. Every person you were concerned about in those letters is actually in training for something greater than they can currently see. Sarah isn't just surviving her illness, she's learning compassion that will help her minister to others in ways that healthy people never could. Michael isn't just enduring rejection, he's developing integrity that will make him a leader people can trust completely. Maria isn't just working through family pain, she's gaining wisdom about forgiveness and restoration that will help countless other families find healing. Their struggles aren't punishment for their faithfulness, their struggles are preparation for their purpose. I'm not making their lives harder, I'm making their impact greater. I asked Jesus why he couldn't just give people supernatural wisdom and compassion without requiring them to go through painful experiences to develop these qualities. His answer showed me something profound about the nature of authentic spiritual authority. Wisdom that isn't earned through experience isn't really wisdom, it's just information. Compassion that isn't developed through personal pain isn't really compassion, it's just sympathy. The depth of someone's ministry is directly related to the depth of their personal journey through difficulty. The people who can bring real hope to others are those who found real hope in their own darkness. The people who can offer authentic comfort are those who received authentic comfort in their own pain. Shallow experience produces shallow ministry. I could give everyone easy lives, but then no one would have the credibility to help others through hard times. I could remove all struggle, but then no one would have the spiritual muscle to represent me to a world that is full of struggle. The chosen ones go through difficulties not for their own sake alone, but for the sake of everyone they'll eventually help. Jesus then began explaining something that completely transformed my understanding of divine love. Most people think love means making someone's life as comfortable as possible. But true love means helping someone become the best possible version of themselves, even when the process is uncomfortable. I love my children too much to leave them unchanged by their experiences with me. A parent who gives their child everything they want without requiring any growth or responsibility isn't showing love, they're showing weakness. A parent who allows their child to face age-appropriate challenges while providing support and guidance is showing true love. I am the perfect father, which means I know exactly what each of my children needs to reach their full potential. The struggles I allow in someone's life are never arbitrary or excessive. They're always purposeful and precisely measured. I know exactly how much pressure each person can handle, exactly how long each trial should last, and exactly what lessons need to be learned. I don't waste pain, and I don't allow meaningless suffering. Every tear has purpose, every disappointment has meaning, every loss has potential for gain, every ending has the seeds of a new beginning. I am constantly working all things together for good in the lives of those who love me and are called according to my purpose. This includes the things that feel terrible in the moment, but produce something beautiful in time. I told Jesus that I was beginning to understand his perspective, but I asked him how people could maintain hope when they were in the middle of difficult seasons and couldn't see any purpose in their pain. His response was filled with such tenderness and practical wisdom that it brought tears to my eyes. Hope isn't based on seeing the outcome. Hope is based on knowing the one who controls the outcome. When people can't see where their story is going, they can still trust the author who is writing their story. When they can't understand the purpose of their current chapter, they can still have faith in the one who sees the entire book. I never ask anyone to understand everything. I only ask them to trust me with everything. Understanding comes later, often much later. But trust can happen right now, in the middle of confusion and pain. Trust says, I don't know what you're doing, but I know who you are, and that's enough for now. The people who make it through the hardest seasons with their faith intact aren't those who figured everything out. They're those who decided that their love for me was stronger than their need for explanations. They chose relationship over reason, trust over understanding, faith over facts. This choice is what transforms them from victims into victors. As Jesus finished sharing these sacred truths with me, something incredible began to happen in this beautiful place where we were walking together. The atmosphere around us began to shift and change, becoming even more radiant and peaceful than it had been before. I felt like I was witnessing the very heart of heaven opening up to reveal its most precious secrets. Suddenly, I began to see people appearing all around us, not physically present, but somehow visible in my spirit. These were all the people I had been concerned about, all the faithful believers whose struggles had caused me to question God's love. But now, instead of seeing them in their pain, I was seeing them as Jesus sees them, transformed and radiant. I saw Sarah, the single mother who had been battling illness while raising her children and serving in ministry. But now I could see the supernatural strength that had been developed in her through her trials, the unshakable faith that had been forged in the fire of difficulty. She wasn't a victim of her circumstances, she was a victor over them, and her victory was inspiring countless others. I saw Michael, the pastor who had lost his position for standing on his convictions, but now I could see the integrity that had been purified through his testing, the character that had been proven authentic under pressure. His willingness to suffer for truth was creating a legacy of faithfulness that would impact generations of believers who needed to see what unwavering conviction looked like. I saw Maria, the missionary whose marriage had been damaged by her years of service, but now I could see the forgiveness that had been cultivated in her heart through her pain, the wisdom that had been gained through her journey of restoration. Her experience was becoming a source of hope for other women who needed to know that broken relationships could be healed and broken hearts could be made whole. As I watched these transformed lives, I began to weep with a mixture of joy and awe. These weren't broken people who had been abandoned by God, these were beautiful people who had been refined by God. Their struggles hadn't destroyed them, their struggles had revealed the gold that had been hidden within them all along. waiting for the right circumstances to bring it to the surface. Jesus put his arm around me as I wept, and his presence brought such comfort and understanding to my heart. "Now, do you see, Jonathan?" He asked gently. "The people you were worried about aren't my forgotten children. They're my masterpieces in progress. Every difficulty they've faced has been a brushstroke in a portrait I'm painting with their lives. You were looking at their circumstances and feeling sorry for them, but I was looking at their character and being proud of them. You were seeing their struggles and questioning my love, but I was seeing their strength and celebrating my work in them. You were focused on their pain, but I was focused on their purpose." I asked Jesus why he had shown me this vision of these transformed lives, and his answer filled my heart with such peace and purpose. Because you needed to see what I see when I look at someone who is going through a difficult season. You needed to understand that their current chapter isn't their final chapter. Their present struggle isn't their permanent state. These people aren't just surviving their trials, they're being transformed through their trials. They're not just enduring their pain, they're being empowered by their pain. They're not just getting through their difficulties, they're growing through their difficulties. This is the difference between secular suffering and sacred suffering. Secular suffering is meaningless pain that produces nothing but bitterness and defeat. Sacred suffering is purposeful pain that produces character, wisdom, strength, and spiritual authority. The difference isn't in the intensity of the suffering. The difference is in the response to the suffering and the one who is working through the suffering. Jesus then looked directly into my eyes and said something that I will remember for the rest of my life. "Jonathan, you have been chosen not just to portray me in a television show, but to represent me in real life. And part of that representation means understanding that following me closely will include seasons of difficulty that are designed to make you more like me. I didn't live a comfortable life on earth. I was misunderstood, rejected, betrayed, and ultimately crucified. But my suffering had purpose. It provided salvation for the world. When my followers experience suffering, their pain also has purpose. It might not provide salvation for others, but it can provide inspiration, encouragement, and hope for others. The struggles you've been experiencing while filming The Chosen aren't accidents or punishments. They're part of your preparation to represent me with authenticity and authority. You can't effectively portray someone you don't know intimately, and you can't know me intimately without experiencing some of what I experienced. Your personal trials while playing this role aren't contradictions to your calling. They're confirmations of your calling. They're evidence that you're not just an actor playing a part, but a servant being prepared for greater service. The depth of your portrayal has been enhanced by the depth of your personal journey. As Jesus spoke these words over my life and calling, I felt something shift in my heart that I had never experienced before. All the confusion, doubt, and questioning that had been tormenting me for years suddenly lifted, replaced by crystal clear understanding and unshakable peace. I finally saw my struggles not as evidence of God's displeasure, but as proof of his trust in me. I realized that the people I had been pitying were actually the people I should have been celebrating. They weren't victims of unfortunate circumstances, they were victors in spiritual battles. They weren't examples of God's absence, they were demonstrations of God's presence. They weren't forgotten by heaven, they were favorites of heaven, trusted with assignments that required extraordinary faith. Jesus smiled as he watched understanding dawn in my heart, and his joy was infectious. I found myself laughing through my tears as I realized how backwards my thinking had been. I had been measuring God's love by earthly standards instead of heavenly standards. I had been judging his goodness by temporary circumstances instead of eternal purposes. "Now you understand," Jesus said with such satisfaction in his voice. "Now you can return to your life and your ministry with the truth that will set you free from the confusion that has been robbing your peace. Now you can help others understand that their struggles aren't evidence of my abandonment, they're evidence of my attention. You can tell them that I haven't forgotten about their pain, I'm using their pain. You can assure them that their trials aren't random, their trials are strategic. You can encourage them that their difficulties aren't permanent, their difficulties are preparatory. You can remind them that they aren't being punished, they're being prepared." As this incredible encounter began to wind down, I felt Jesus preparing to send me back to my regular life with this life-changing revelation. But before he did, he wanted to give me one final truth that would sustain me through any future seasons of testing. Remember, Jonathan, that I never waste anything. Every experience, every struggle, every triumph, every failure, I use it all. The pain you've experienced while questioning my love for my chosen ones hasn't been wasted time. It's been necessary preparation for this revelation. You needed to feel the confusion before you could appreciate the clarity. You needed to experience the doubt before you could value the certainty. You needed to go through the questioning before you could receive the answer. And now, armed with this understanding, you can return to your life and ministry with a completely different perspective on suffering. You can look at people who are struggling and see them as I see them, not as victims, but as victors in training, not as forgotten, but as chosen, not as punished, but as prepared for something greater. Every time you put on that costume and step in front of the cameras to portray me, remember that you're not just playing a role, you're sharing a revelation. You're not just entertaining people, you're educating them about who I really am and how I really work in the lives of those who trust me. As Jesus spoke these final words over me, I felt such overwhelming gratitude and peace filling my heart. All the questions that had tormented me for years had been answered. All the confusion that had clouded my faith had been cleared. All the doubt that had weakened my ministry had been dissolved. I finally understood why chosen ones struggle the most, because they're trusted the most. I woke up from this encounter completely transformed, with a peace and understanding that I had never experienced before. Suddenly, all the struggles in my own life made perfect sense. They weren't punishments for my faithfulness, they were preparations for my purpose. They weren't evidence that God had forgotten about me, they were proof that He was actively working in me. I realized that every difficulty I had faced while portraying Jesus had actually made my portrayal more authentic and powerful. The confusion I had felt about suffering had given me compassion for others who were confused. The questions I had wrestled with had prepared me to provide answers to people with similar questions. Now, when I read letters from viewers who are struggling, I don't see them as victims of unfortunate circumstances. I see them as chosen ones being prepared for extraordinary purposes. I don't pity their pain, I celebrate their potential. I don't question God's love for them, I marvel at His trust in them. Father God, I pray right now for every person who is watching this and wondering why they're facing such difficult struggles while trying so hard to follow You faithfully. Help them to see their trials through Your eyes instead of their own. Help them understand that their struggles aren't evidence of Your displeasure, but proof of Your trust in them. Give them strength to persevere through their difficulties, knowing that You're using every challenge to prepare them for something greater than they can imagine. If you're watching this and you're going through a hard season right now, please know that you're not forgotten, you're not punished, and you're not alone. You're chosen, you're trusted, and you're being prepared for a purpose that will make every struggle worth it. Your pain has meaning, your tears have purpose, and your faithfulness is creating a testimony that will help others find hope in their own dark seasons. Keep trusting, keep believing, and keep moving forward, because your story isn't over yet. If this message touched your heart today, please subscribe and share your own story in the comments below. I'd love to hear how God is working in your life.